Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1996 action film Last Man Standing. Now, to me personally, Last Man Standing is not only one of Bruce Willis's most underrated films in his filmography, but it's also an underrated gem, period. It's not perfect. Very few films are. For instance, it's got a love story that goes nowhere and seems rather pointless. There are some other issues that I have with the script, but those are relatively minor for the most part because this is such an enjoyable and unique action film. It's a take on Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, but instead of like a for a few dollars more or something like that, or a fistful of dollars, that kind of story, it's a western that takes place during the Prohibition era. So it's a Great Depression era western during the height of like mob and gang warfare, and it involves this guy named John Smith who's played by Bruce Willis in a very uncommon kind of role. He doesn't play leads in period pieces very much at all. And this guy shows up in this town called Jericho in the middle of nowhere, and he starts playing both sides of these two gangs that are warring with one another for control of this small town and the profits in this town, because he sees it as an easy way to make money. But then he ends up being caught in the middle of this gang war. He falls for this woman, and it leads to him ultimately having to fend for himself with his two guns and be the final guy to pull the final trigger to end this war. And it's a simple premise, but it really does work. It really clicks. The film is directed by Walter Hill, and I thought that he did a wonderful job with this movie. This film has some really stark imagery in it. It's a very dusty, grimy, dirty looking movie, but it really does fit the era and it fits the setting. This is a town that looks like it has countless of places within it that are just caked in dust or cobwebs. It's a ghost town practically. The only thing that's keeping anybody there is crime. That's it. Like crime bosses and mobs, they set up shop there, but that's the only thing that's keeping anything running or keeping any sort of business going on there. And you also have the people, of course, that, wind up in the wrong place at the wrong time and become targets for these mobs. And John Smith winds up being one of them, but they fucked with the wrong guy. And then he starts working for them. But then he quickly realizes that he doesn't necessarily want to just squeeze all the money he can out of these mobs. He realizes that he wants to put an end to them his way. And Walter Hill directed the action sequences in a way that was just absolutely awesome and badass. Like the guns were loud and they were blaring, and the way that people got shot in this movie, it was just as explosive and loud as the gunfire. People were flying backwards multiple feet. It's a really terrific action film when it comes to the action scenes. Like, they're loud, they're just really strong and powerful and have a genuine impact. It really does make you feel each bullet hit and each gunfight in a way that was very visceral and just really quite something else. And you can definitely see Walter Hill's inspiration when it comes to the style of the action in this movie. This is Walter Hill's take on John Woo. And as a tribute to John Woo's style, it's really impressive. It's incredible. Like, the action sequences in this, the gunfights in this, they're honestly right up there with some of the best of this genre, especially around this time. And you throw that in there, and then you have Walter Hill's inherent talents that are on display when it comes to showcasing a location and making it breathe and making it come to life visually in only the way that he knows how. And you have quite a special combination of elements that just come together in a very satisfying fashion. So, yeah, I think Last Man Standing is a really well-directed film, and you can honestly look at it as the last stand of Walter Hill. Like, this is the last hurrah of Walter Hill as a lot of people knew him. Like, I've always been a big fan of his, from 48 Hours to Streets of Fire. The list goes on. He's a very unique filmmaker who had a great sense of style, a great use of lighting, a great use of camera techniques and movement and angles and so on. There are a lot of shots in this that are just really impressive and just showcase this man's strengths. And this was also sadly around the time when his career was in a downward spiral. He was stuck in a dead-end place in his career, similar to John Smith being stuck in this dead-end town named Jericho. And afterwards, he decided to take a break. He went into semi-retirement for the most part after this movie because it didn't do that well, critically or financially. And then he tried to make a comeback, and he just wasn't the same. So, yeah, for me, this is the last hurrah of Walter Hill. This is the last film that I can point to that really showcases how talented and how tremendous of a talent he really was as a director. And his writing is no slouch either. This is some nice writing, because he also wrote the screenplay. It's a good take on Yojimbo. It feels fresh and different despite it being an old story that's been adapted before in countless other films. I like the fact that it's a Western that takes place during the Prohibition era. Like, you don't see very many Westerns that take place during that era of history. So it's really quite a nice dynamic that the script creates by having this setting. But it's not just the setting that works. The way that the plot unfolds, for the most part, other than the romance angle, I think is really strong and quite a impactful series of events. For instance, I really do think that Walter Hill nailed how John Smith comes into this town. The town crooks try to intimidate him, but he's not having any of it and just blows one of them away. And then, as a result, he is able to get his foot in the door and starts working for these two different mobs who are competing for control of this town. And throughout the process, he realizes that maybe there's more to life, there's more to his existence than just going from town to town and working with one unsavory individual from another to make however much money as he can get. He realizes that there's more to life than that, and he becomes a hero, where he decides to take it upon himself to put an end to this mob war, to be the one to end this reign of terror for good, and just take both these mobs out of business. And it's simple, but it's effective. How he plays both sides and then how he turns the tables. It's really effective, satisfying stuff. I also like how the script creates a bond or friendship between John and this bartender, this guy who owns this hotel, named Joe Monday. I like the back and forth between the two. I like the various differences between the two mobs. How one's from Chicago and the other, they're from the West. So you have West, and then you have like the East, Eastern, part of the United States kind of mobs. So you had the people who were in Chicago, but then you had the people who were from like California, sort of that area. And I think the script did a good job showing the various differences between the two in terms of how they operate, in terms of their traditions, in terms of their personalities. I think the script did a great job establishing the mystique of a character like Hickey, who's the chief enforcer of Doyle, and also the stuff going on with Sheriff Ed Galt, who is a guy who you're not really sure which side he's on, and when it comes to the action set pieces, like I said, they are explosive and they are really, really good. And there's a lot of variety there too. It's not just, oh, Bruce Willis shoots a guy and just does this and that. Like there's a lot more variety there in terms of the different ways that he takes people out with his guns. And speaking of guns, I really like the bit of the script that shows how vulnerable John Smith can be. How often do you see a screenplay like this with a machismo filled kind of protagonist who shows moments of real vulnerability? I mean, he gets his ass kicked. He gets his guns taken away. He gets tied up. And he gets the shit kicked out of him. Like, he gets so beat up that he can't even see out of one eye because it's so swollen. He's so messed up that he has to go recuperate and recover and heal at a church in the middle of the desert for like a month or two. That's not the kind of thing that you normally see in this kind of film. So I really like that inclusion as well when it comes to the narrative. But it does have some problems. For one, the romance is useless. It's not strong. It's not captivating. It's not charming. It's not romantic. You don't really give a shit about the character, for one. You don't really care about Felina. You don't really care about whether or not John and Felina become an item. None of that really matters to you. At least not to me anyway. And there's this whole sort of other relationship that potentially could be a thing with John and this other woman named Lucy. And that doesn't really go anywhere either. I understand why the script is trying to have these two female characters and trying to have them have some sort of place in the story. And I get it, and I have no problem with that whatsoever, but not in a way where it just comes across so lazy and so inconsequential to the story. I understand why Felina's there. I get what they're trying to go for. Like, she's the reason why John Smith decides to do the opposite of what he normally does, where he takes the money and runs and doesn't think twice. This is where he decides to actually take matters into his own hands and take these mobs out. But I don't really feel that, other than that, this character was strong enough or compelling enough that she needed to be such a focus. I would have rather have had more scenes with John Smith playing both sides of the mob, or John Smith working alongside or having some fun with with the other guy who runs a hotel, Joe, or just another action sequence, like just something other than these dead end romance scenes that go nowhere. And the climax, it's okay. I understand what they're trying to do, like a showdown in an old western, but it doesn't really have the same impact. It doesn't have the same explosiveness as the other action scenes. And it's also one of those things too where you're like, okay, we have this showdown between Hickey and Doyle and this other guy and John Smith, but it also seems like something that's just a little too easy. Like, John Smith takes these guys out like they're nothing, and it's just one of those things where, I don't know, maybe it would have preferred like a little bit more explosive or bloody finale, because it seemed like it was building up to something that was a little bit more grand. And when you have the other shootouts in the film that have like dual guns and are just really thrilling, and then you have the climax, which is just like John Smith in an abandoned, burned out building, and these three guys show up, and his partner Joe shoots one of them, and then he shoots this other guy, and then Christopher Walken's character Hickey tries to pull a trick on John, and then he just shoots him and doesn't fall for him for his nonsense, and that's it. And it's just kind of like, this is kind of a weak climax. So those are really the only times, though, where the script is out of bullets, where it's dealing with an empty chamber, so to speak. For the most part, though, the chambers are loaded, and they really do have quite an impact. The cast, it's relatively strong. I mean, Bruce Willis, I thought he was great. I thought he was fantastic as John Smith. He was a badass, but he also really nailed that vulnerable aspect of that character, showing that this is a guy who really is pretty much nothing without his guns. Like, without his guns, he can't hold his own. He can't fend for himself, let alone fend for others. And I liked that. I liked how Bruce Willis handled that character. And I think the director mentioned how Bruce, in a lot of ways, was channeling like an older kind of actor from the golden age of Hollywood. So it was channeling someone like Humphrey Bogart. And you can definitely see that with his performance in Last Man Standing. Bruce Dern, he's fine as the sheriff that you don't know which way he's going or which side he's on. William Sanderson, I really liked his performance as Joe Monday. I had a lot of fun with his take on that character, this quirky bartender who becomes friends with John Smith. Christopher Walken, speaking of quirky, I mean, he's as kooky as ever in this as Hickey, and pretty damn intimidating. David Patrick Kelly, he's fine as Doyle. He was intimidating in his own right at times, because he definitely has that creepy presence about him. Like, he's always done a good job playing these characters that are obsessed and just guys that you definitely didn't want to cross and be on the wrong end of. Karina Lombard, not really that great. She was nice to look at, but the performance was nothing special. But then again, neither was the character, neither was the writing for Felina, so I'm not going to be too harsh on her, but I just didn't really think she added that much to the movie. She didn't even have any chemistry with Bruce Willis either. That was completely non-existent. Ned Eisenberg is as Fredo Strassi. I will say this: I think Doyle and Hickey were definitely stronger, intimidating presences than the Strassis. But I think that might have been the point, because the Strassis were intended to be like younger, brasher, more immature mobsters who didn't have as much experience as Doyle and Hickey. That's why you have like Ned Eisenberg and Michael Imperioli who play the two uh, Chicago mobsters. Artie Call, he's been in quite a few things. He was in Waterworld. He was in Young Guns too. He was also in 48 Hours. He plays this guy named Jack McCool. I think it's like this cop guy. Yeah, he's like a police officer. He's a guy from out of town who's trying to nail these mobsters. Alexandra Powers, she plays Lucy, this dame who is in relationship, I think, with either Fredo or Giorgio, and she's got a lot of spunk, but the performance was just there for me. Leslie Mann's in this in a very early role as a hooker named Wanda, and you even have Patrick Kilpatrick, the Sandman from Death Warrant himself, and he plays one of the enforcers for Doyle, Finn, who's like the second best enforcer after Hickey. And he starts fucking with Bruce Willis's character John Smith in the beginning of the movie. He's trying to act like a total badass and like he's tough shit. And then Bruce Willis later on shows him that he ain't shit. Like he's nothing. Challenges him to a gunfight, and Bruce Willis blows him the fuck away in memorable fashion. It was fun to see Patrick Kilpatrick, though, especially seeing him face off with Bruce Willis. The film also features some cinematography by Lloyd Ahern, and I thought it was awesome. I thought he did an amazing job. The movie looks really good, despite the fact that, yeah, it's dirty and dusty, but that's the whole premise of it. That's the whole point, and the cinematography just meshes so well with Walter Hill's vision for the movie. The film's also well edited by Freeman A. Davies, especially when it comes to the action sequences and the gunfights. The editing is very punchy and just strong in its own right. Like it doesn't really have a lot of moments where it's too erratic, for instance. And it's edited in a way where you can see every bullet hit and feel every moment in the action sequence. And even in other scenes that aren't dealing with an action scene, they also showcase some nice editing, especially like the opening scene. There's some really nice tracking shots in this film, some good POV shots in this movie. And it also features a score by Ry Cooder. And I thought Ry Cooder's score for this was really quite something special. I thought it was a tremendous score. I thought Ry did a great job. The opening credits theme, for instance, is really memorable. And I've always liked Ry Cooder's music. I've always felt he really did add a lot of uniqueness to his films, and this score is no exception. It's unique. It's definitely something you don't hear every day, but it fits the film well. It's a unique movie. It's an interesting mix of different sort of genres, and it's a take on Yojimbo that's very different from other takes on that story. And the score just really elevates the film in a lot of other ways. It adds its own unique flavor to the movie. And it's a weapon in its own right. But it's one of those things where the score can be a weapon that can really provide a lot of impact and really hit a particular target if it's the right weapon for the job or the right kind of take. And I definitely feel that Ry Cooder was the right guy. He was the right trigger man when it comes to this film's score. Although he wasn't the initial choice, I think it was Elmer Bernstein as one of those guys. I think it was Elmer Bernstein. He did a score, but Walter Hill didn't like it, and he fired him like halfway through because he's like, "This is not what I'm looking for." And you know what? I'm fine with it. Elmer Bernstein's a great composer, but if it's not working, it's not fitting your vision, go right ahead. Let the guy go. Get in somebody, bring in someone that is going to provide you with the music that you want, that you're looking for when it comes to this kind of movie. And I felt Ry Cooder was just great because he's a guy who has a lot of Western sort of influence with his scores anyway, in terms of like the genre of Westerns. You know, it has a very country, twangy sort of vibe, and it really did fit the film. But I really don't know what else to say about Last Man Standing, except I definitely would check this one out. I think it's a movie that should have done a little bit better in the box office and with critics. It did really poorly. It was not a hit by any means for New Line. It cost $67 million, and for the most part, I think a lot of it is on the screen when it comes to the action sequences and Jericho and just the whole look of the film. Definitely looked like it had some production value behind it, and not just low production value. I mean significant production value. And it only made like 47 million in the U.S. and it had a lot of just middling or downright poor reviews. I mean, Roger Ebert gave it like 1 out of 4 stars. He said it's a desperately cheerless film, so dry and laconic and wrung out that you wonder if the filmmakers ever thought that in any way it could be fun. I disagree with that. I think it's a fun movie. I had a lot of fun with it. I don't really get what he's getting at there. I didn't find it to be a cheerless, dry, laconic, wrung out film at all. I thought it was exciting. I thought it was a breath of fresh air, especially when it comes to Bruce Willis's filmography, and when it comes to the Western genre. To have a Western take place during this time period, that was a breath of fresh air for me. I really liked Last Man Standing. And anyway, I don't really know what to say except thanks for watching my review of the film. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.